Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying this period 3 series here so far as we've been chugging along in our A-Push video lectures, and this installment is going to be continuing along the lines of government. And we saw in the last video that the Articles of Confederation was a failure. It really did not give the federal government enough power, and the people with Shays' Rebellion showed that the federal government had to be tweaked, and that's what we're going to get to today with the Constitutional Convention. This is topic 3.8 in our unit guides, and what we're going to see is that this convention is not easy. It's a series of negotiations, collaborations, compromises. You have the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. You have the Federalist Papers written by John Jay and James Madison and Alexander Hamilton trying to convince the people to adopt Madison's Constitution. And you have the fears of the Anti-Federalists that they are creating a too strong government in the federal branch. So we're going to dive into that. We're going to see the debates. We're going to see the compromise. We're going to see how we actually get to the Constitution itself. So just to kind of set the stage, remember that the government under the AOC was intentionally weak. They wanted to prevent a tyrant, a monarchy in the United States, and it was meant to protect the states and the individual liberties. They couldn't tax. It was too daunting to create laws and to amend laws, and the national government was essentially broke. And it took Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts to show the people of the federal branch that something had to be changed. And in 1787, you're going to have 55 delegates from the states show up in Philadelphia to strengthen the national government. They're going to figure out, or they're going to decide that something has to be done. The AOC is no good, and instead of revising the AOC, they're going to replace it, which ironically is illegal because remember, you need to have a consensus to amend anything within the AOC. They're just going to decide to rip it up and throw it out. And you're going to have a series of governments set up very similar, very inspired by Montesquieu, the Enlightenment thinker, as far as having checks and balances and a separation of powers where you have three distinctly different branches, not one that is more powerful than the other, and each of them has the ability to check the power and make sure the other one is not taking over. And you have your legislative branch, and this will hopefully ring a bell from your civics class. You have the legislative branch to make laws. You have the executive branch to carry out laws, and you have the judicial branch to evaluate laws. And even though that, this is not to say that states had no power, but they're going to have substantially less power than they did under the Articles of Confederation. And this is one of the things that the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists are going to heavily debate about, is who should have more power? There should be a strong central government or a strong state government? And the Supremacy Clause is what's going to come out of this. And the easy way to remember what the Supremacy Clause says, if you don't remember this from your civics class, is that the Constitution or the federal government reigns supreme. Okay, and supreme meaning the top, they are the best. Okay, so they are the law of the land. So anything that the federal government says, the state government cannot go against. They can add to it, but they cannot go against federal law. An example of this would be, let's say, the alcohol law. So the federal government says you cannot drink alcohol or consume alcohol unless you are 21 years of age. If Virginia decided that with new research coming out that the brain does not fully develop until 25, if they wanted to raise their state drinking age to 25, they can do so. But they cannot make it 18. They can only enhance the law. They cannot go against the law. And the Constitution is going to have more power. It's going to have new features, things that the Articles of Confederation could not do. And we'll get more in depth with that in our next lesson. But just understand the Constitution has more power than the AOC did for the federal government. There's actually an executive branch to execute the laws that are made by the legislatures. Instead of having one single legislative branch, there will be three equal branches of government. There will be a legislative branch again, there will be an executive branch, and there will be a judicial branch. Now, the legislative branch, they can now have the power to tax and collect money and distribute money. They couldn't do those things under the AOC where you had different states with different currency systems. You have an executive branch now that is meant to enforce and lead. Okay, did not have this before. And then you also have the judicial branch to interpret laws and prosecute federal crimes. So you actually have a federal branch of judges that can oversee state conflicts and that can even make federal punishments for crimes that are seen on a federal level, not just a state level. And there are going to be major principles of the Constitution that are established amongst all of the delegates. All 55 agree on these things. They all agree on popular sovereignty, the idea of democracy, and having a republic system set up of voting. Nobody wants to get rid of that. They all believe in separation of powers, where there should not be one branch that is more powerful than the other ones. In judicial review, we will talk more about that when that comes out of Marbury versus Madison case in period 4. But the idea that the judicial branch can interpret laws, that's really not an original idea. Federalism, the idea that states still have power. Okay, the states are they're not the supreme power, but they still do have power and they do have sovereignty. Checks and balances, that each branch should be checked on by the others, and again, limited government, that there should not be an overarching government in your lives. And like I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a whole heck of a lot of collaboration and compromises taking place here at the Constitutional Convention. This is not an easy process by any stretch. And one of the things they're going to be compromising about or trying to figure out about is how are we going to worry about how states or representatives are going to be chosen. Because remember, under the Articles of Confederation, each state had one vote. If you're a small state, you love that, because if you're Rhode Island, you have just as much say as Virginia. If you're New York, though, if you're Pennsylvania, you don't want Delaware to have as much say as you do, because you have more people, you're larger, you're more important in your eyes than these smaller states, so therefore you should have more say. So there's going to be a way to try to figure that out. How are we going to solve the large state versus small state issue? And we will have different states come out with different plans, and the best way to remember these states and these plans is what would each state really want. So think about Virginia. Virginia is one of the largest states, if not the largest state, I believe, at the time. Their plan is going to have a bicameral legislature, so 2 houses, both where the larger states have more say, more representatives, which would make more sense if you're Virginia, because you want to be based on population, because you have a larger population, you have more say. The New Jersey plan, however, is going to be just like the AOC. It's going to be a unicameral Congress, so one house, with equal representation amongst the states. Each state gets 1 vote. If you're New Jersey, you're Delaware, you're Rhode Island, you love this plan because, again, it gives you more power. However, what's going to become known as the Great Compromise, I would make sure I remember this, or the Connecticut plan, sometimes you'll hear it called, is where we're going to have a bicameral legislature. We're going to have a House. We're going to have a Senate. Our first house, called the House of Representatives, is based on population. So larger states have more of a say. And you serve a 2-year term. The second part, or the second house, is the Senate, where you get 2 reps from each state who serve 6-year terms. So that would be more like the New Jersey plan. So this is a way of combining the two and having, again, a compromise for both the large and the small states. There's also going to be issues over the idea of slavery. We've already talked about under the AOC, the Northwest Territory outlawed slavery. You also have your northern free states at this point, okay, above the Mason-Dixon line, where slavery is already outlawed. So what are we going to do as far as population distribution in the small slave states? Because if you're a slave state, you want every single living being to count towards population, because it gives you more of a representation. If you're the North, and your goal is to eventually abolish slavery, you don't want the South to be able to count their slaves, because therefore they will be able to enshrine slavery longer.